So let's continue with our overview, or our introduction to qualitative research. Now, to do this, I'd like to kind of compare to the research methods you're already familiar with, which are more quantitative and traditional in nature. And taking a regular research methods class is a prereq for this class because I really wanted you to have the basis of traditional research methods when you're learning qualitative methods, because they're very different, but they have some overlapping issues. And therefore, as you can see in this table where I'm comparing quantitative to qualitative, the middle line is dotted, meaning that you can't put everything into a box, but you can talk about these two types of research in different ways. So let's start off by just talking about the traditional or quantitative research methods that you might already know. So we know that the purpose of your classes, or what you've learned about research so far, is that you're trying to confirm a hypothesis or a guess about how things will come out in your data, in your study. So often in quantitative research, you're asking things like how many people come to UAF because they want to be on a specific sports team? Is it statistically significant more people come to UAF if they want to be on a sports team? So therefore, the data in quantitative research is often numbers and statistical results from analysis. And the methods used are often very structured. There might be specific equipment like scales or some kind of psychological equipment or things like that, or very, very specific and well-developed questionnaires and surveys. They often use closed-ended questions toward quantifiable answers. So that's like the tick marks that I was showing you before, where you're forced to just check a specific answer, and you don't really have a lot of leeway to add more things or to be a little more nuanced in your answers. The design in quantitative is usually very structured, and it's developed in advance. You don't want things to change once you start the research. You want every single participant, every single result to be very equal in their ability to be in your data set. And the reports for quantitative data are often results, and they're reported using very objective, unbiased language, and the numbers and statistics are often the data that are reported. But what about qualitative research? The purpose of qualitative research is to explore, explain, and understand. So instead of answering how many, you're answering what and why and in what situations, under what circumstances. The data for qualitative research are often narratives, words, phrases. They can be pictures, objects that you're exploring, events, things like that. The methods used are often much less structured. They might include open-ended questions during interviews, being open to observations and just sitting and looking, or analyzing the content of specific things like newspaper articles or diaries or things like that. So therefore, the data or the methods often use open-ended questions towards exploration. And in qualitative research, the designs can be pretty flexible. So if you are in the middle of a qualitative study and you decide, I want to explore something in a different way, you can actually change the way you explore things, and that can be okay for your data. You don't have to do everything exactly the same. It doesn't have to be fixed and standardized as it would be in regular research. The reports of qualitative data are often called the findings, and they're reported using subjective, often value-laden, and interpretive language. They often include quotes from what you've been looking at, like maybe from interviews or from what people have said, or even photographs. And we'll get into a lot of this more later throughout the semester. Further comparing quantitative to qualitative research, here's some very specific characteristics. While quantitative research is very objective, qualitative is often subjective. In quantitative, there's this idea that there's one truth and you can get to it with maybe a little bit of error. And that's your 0.05% alpha that you might have learned about in research methods. But in qualitative research, you're really trying to get at people's experiences or their rationale for things. And therefore, there might be multiple realities. Everybody has their own story. And your idea is to try to find some of the similarities and the differences. In quantitative research, there's a lot of emphasis on reduction, controlling, and prediction. In terms of controlling, we're talking about controlling for extraneous factors so that you do not have error in your results. So if you find that something is significant and something causes another thing or something is associated with another thing, you don't want another variable to be influencing your findings. And so you're trying to control for all the extraneous information that might be out there. Whereas in qualitative research, you embrace this extraneous information. It's very contextual. The idea is for discovery, description, and deep, deep understanding. In quantitative research, things are measurable. And in qualitative, we talk about it as interpretive. You're interpreting what other people are saying. In quantitative research, the sum of the parts are made into a whole. Whereas in qualitative research, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And that's because you're embracing the external context. Further, in quantitative research, reports include statistical findings, the how many, right? Whereas in qualitative research, the report is rich narrative. Why and how and by whom and under what circumstances. In quantitative research, the researcher is separate and disengaged. That's the objectivity that is embraced in quantitative research. Whereas in qualitative, the researcher is part of the research process because they're interpreting the data. It's up to the researcher to take things apart and put it back together. In quantitative, the participants are subjects. In qualitative, they're participants or partners. In quantitative, it's context-free. Like I said, it's controlled. Whereas in qualitative, the context is very important. It's context dependent, and therefore we don't control. There are many names for qualitative research, so you might come across some of these in your readings. So these all are just saying quantitative or qualitative research. There are also many names associated with qualitative research. So here are some names that you might come across. Maybe someday your name will be on this list. So more than one story can be created from data, and we'll take a little stab at looking through some data to see what stories you can find. And here are some examples of qualitative study titles, very recent, and they use things like interviews or focus groups or both in their research. And we'll be going through many of the methods that people use in qualitative research studies throughout the semester. So I hope that this brief introduction was not too confusing and not too hard to listen to, because I'm horrible at recording. And there are 2 activities for you to do, and I hope you enjoy yourself.